Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Monday, September 19th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Wisconsin game is in 5 days, the game against Michigan in 68 days. We're now through 3 full weeks of the college football season, which doesn't seem like much, but it also means we are a quarter of the way through the regular season for most teams. It is starting to feel like there is more parity in the sport, at least, from about 4 or 5 in the rankings down to maybe 25 or 30 or so. And that has led to some surprising results, crazy chains of games. For example, we're 3 weeks into the season, and Eastern Kentucky has a transitive win over Notre Dame. I'll show my work, that's fine. Eastern Kentucky beat Bowling Green beat Marshall won in South Bend. Ta-da! Eastern Kentucky Colonials. Are they the best FBS independent? Maybe, who's to say? It has also made the race for the conference title in the Big Ten and other leagues a lot more unpredictable than usual, so to try and make sense of things right now, let's welcome in the only person I know who ever makes any sense. He is Tony Gerdeman of BuckeyeHuddle.com. Tony, I mean, to me, this has been a little crazier than normal, which also means it has really been a very fun college football season so far.
Thank you, Tom. I'm doing great. Thank you for asking. But, do we expect anything less from the Big Ten, one of the wildest conferences in football? The thing that is most shocking, which shouldn't be shocking at all, is that we're already past week 3 and heading into week 4, and we know this thing moves. But I'm still waiting for the teams that have started slow to muddy up everything else, especially in the Big Ten West. Not that it can get any muddier, but as we now get into conference play, you can have wild shifts, and that's what I'm looking forward to.
All right, so let's start with something I guess that is not really a big surprise or not really a big shift from normal. The Big Ten East looks like it might be substantially better than the Big Ten West this season, top to bottom. Michigan State is the only team in the Big Ten East to lose a game so far. They lost to Washington on Saturday night. That's it. Everyone else is perfect. Minnesota is the only Big Ten West team not to lose. Everyone else has lost a game, and Minnesota has played not a great schedule, and we'll get to the Gophers in a little bit. But, I think the question in the Big Ten, okay, you've got 6 teams who are unbeaten. You've got a 7th who, Michigan State, you sort of figure is probably at least decent, probably. So, top to bottom, how do you rank at least, let's just do the top 4. How would you rank the top 4 teams in the Big Ten East right now?
It's unfortunate that you went to 4 because that's where
sure is.
It's almost as if you planned this, Tom, but I know that's not the case. I think you go Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State. I think that is true to form of the actual AP and coaches poll. That 4th team, I was very unimpressed with what Michigan State did at Washington. The running game is lacking. There's no consistency now. I think they were without Jaden Reed, their top receiver, but still, they did not look good. Can I answer this after I see Maryland play Michigan this Saturday? Can I just put this up? Can we table this discussion, Tom, for another time? I think I will go. I'm not a believer in Indiana. I can't do that yet. So this isn't being recorded, is it? I think I'm going to go Maryland. Maybe I have to. They don't have a loss.
Now I'm trying to remember if Ohio is a 1-party or 2-party state, because I'm not sure I have to answer that question. Maryland is interesting. I've got Ohio State, I've got Michigan, I've got Penn State 1 through 3. The gap between 2 and 3, I think, is smaller than it would have been 4 days ago, and the gap from 3 to 4 is now much bigger than it would have been a few days ago. I think to me, I think I might still go Michigan State. It just feels like I feel like I've fallen into the September Maryland trap too many times. It's like, well, look, they beat Texas. They must be good this year. And then they lose to, 66-17 to Ohio State 3 weeks later. Or they, have, how many interceptions did they have? We watched a Maryland-Iowa game at one point on a Friday night, and it was like, wow, Maryland might be, no. That is very bad. That was maybe last year at Rutgers, the Friday night. It just kind of all fell apart for them.
2 years ago, it was the Penn State game.
Yeah. It just feels like I'm going to have to see a little more from Maryland before I put them in the top 4. But on its face, I think that's a reasonable. It's a reasonable thing to sort of to think, and the talent is maybe there, and maybe the defense is there, and maybe, but I'm kind of with you. I feel like you'll know a lot more about that fourth spot when you see how Maryland does against Michigan this upcoming week. Now to the real fun question. So the top four in the Big Ten West right now, there's only one unbeaten team, as I said. Some of the other contenders have scored 2 safeties and a field goal against a not very good team. Have lost to Washington State at home. Lost 2 games already. Who you got? Top 4 in the Big Ten West right now.
You look at it and I can just go Minnesota, Wisconsin. I want to go Purdue number 3, and they're at 1-2 and 0-1 in the conference. I think Illinois is they're interesting. I think they can do some damage against the Big Ten West. I don't know that the Northwestern Wildcats can do much damage against the Big Ten West, but to say that I don't think these guys can beat the Big Ten West, it's like I've seen the Big Ten West. Anybody can beat them, so it's not fair to say that they can't. I know it's not Nebraska. I know I'm pretty sure it's not Northwestern. So now I've got, 5 teams there to pick 4 from, and I really, really don't want to take Iowa, but their defense is really good right now, and against the rest of the Big Ten West, they could throw a couple of shutouts and win by 3 in those games. So I guess Minnesota 1, Wisconsin 2, Iowa 3, and I still think I would expect Purdue to beat every other team in the Big Ten West and on a neutral site. So I will put them 4th, knowing that they're going to lose to somebody they shouldn't. Obviously, it's the Big Ten West, so I'll put them 4 and feel a little bit bad about not having Illinois in there.
I think you're broadly correct. I would flip the top 2 because Minnesota, Michigan, Minnesota is sort of like, as everyone is talking about what a garbage schedule Michigan has played, Minnesota is just kind of like walking down the street with its hand in its pockets, whistling to itself, like, all right, nobody look over here. Yes, undefeated Minnesota has beaten New Mexico State, Western Illinois, and Colorado, which, Michigan has beaten 3 of the 10 worst teams in FBS. Minnesota might have beaten 2 of the 10 worst teams in FBS and also a not particularly good FCS team. So we'll see how long the 3-0 holds up is, I think, my takeaway there. And they've killed those teams, but I don't know how much it really means. Wisconsin, I don't know. Maybe this is me relying too much on previous seasons, but Wisconsin loses early season stupid games, it feels like, all the time, and then ends up being perfectly fine and being a normal Wisconsin team at the end of the year. And, they might be 9-3 when they go to Indianapolis, but they'll go to Indianapolis. I think Wisconsin is my number 1 until I really see something from someone else. I'll go Minnesota 2, and then, I have on my notes here, Purdue, Iowa, ? Or Iowa, Purdue, ? It's just, I feel like Purdue is probably, on a neutral field. I think I'd probably take Purdue over Iowa just because I feel like Iowa's defense is very good, but I think Purdue's probably getting to 24 points, and I don't know that Iowa's getting to 24 points against Purdue. So I think I'm going to go Wisconsin, Minnesota, Purdue, Iowa there on the West. But yes, that is a 2-loss team. Yeah, sure. Yeah,
Minnesota is at Michigan State this weekend. Spartans are a 2-point favorite in that one. If Minnesota wants people to believe in them, they have to win this game. If you want to show you aren't just Minnesota of old or Minnesota of ever, then go win at Michigan State and prove yourself. That game will help one of those teams start to maybe trick some people into believing them. Although Michigan State already had it. They were number 11 going to Washington this past weekend.
And I think they were an underdog in that game. So, number 11 was an underdog against an unranked team, which is everyone is kind of, all the rankings are kind of in finger quotes. Number 11, Michigan State. It's sure, okay, absolutely. So we just did sort of the tops of the divisions. Now I want to kind of drill down on some individual teams, and largely teams we haven't talked about before, but a couple that we have to some degree. The 3-0 teams in the Big Ten East right now: Rutgers, Maryland, and Indiana. I would like you to rank them from the most likely to least likely of those 3-0 teams to make a bowl game this season?
I am a stickler for best home schedule and worst road schedule. I'll just count the road games as losses. And, Maryland having to go to Wisconsin that's a loss. They go to Michigan, that's a loss. They go to Penn State, that's a loss. They play Ohio State at home, you think that's a loss. But I do think they can win 3 more games in their next 9 or whatever. Most likely to least likely. Rutgers never makes it easy, so I will just assume they're not going to make it easy, and I'll go Indiana, most likely Maryland, then Rutgers, and I'm looking at Indiana's schedule. They're at Cincinnati, at Nebraska. They have Michigan at home, Maryland at home, at Rutgers, Penn State at home. They're at Ohio State, which is what you would kind of want anyway, because you don't want to waste a home game against Ohio State because you're going to lose. So at least one of the losses is a road game to Ohio State. At Michigan State, they have Penn State at home. I think there's, can they get to 7 or 8 wins? I think so. Purdue is iffy. Michigan State, you never know. Rutgers, you never know. Maryland. So I think they could possibly, and they've got Nebraska in there. I will say Indiana most likely, Maryland second most, Rutgers least likely, but I think all 3 probably make a bowl game.
Rutgers, I feel, is number 3 to me, because it's like you look at their schedule, and the tricky thing here is any of them could, but the swing games for pretty much all of them, it's like some of them, someone's going 5-7 and someone's going 6-6, and it's just a matter of when Maryland plays Rutgers or when Rutgers plays Indiana, who wins that game, because you can kind of count it for half a win for both of them, but when they play, only one team can actually win, so those swing games feel like that's going to be what determines it. I'm not that high on Indiana right now. I feel like Maryland's probably my most likely there, and they're not they're not a lock to make a bowl game by any means. I'm just not very high on Indiana right now. They have not looked great. A couple times they needed a kind of not great officiating decision to beat Illinois. They needed to go to overtime to beat Western Kentucky. I'm not real sold on the Hoosiers right now, so I'll go Maryland, Indiana, and then Rutgers. But it feels like Rutgers, even Rutgers gets to maybe 5 wins this year. And at that point, you're one bounce of a ball or one big play or one missed tackle away from potentially winning a 6th game and getting back to a bowl game for the 2nd year in a row, completely legitimately this time. Now, on the west side of the conference, we're going to talk about 3 1-win teams. Northwestern 1-2, Purdue 1-2, Nebraska 1-3. I feel like the sentence I just said probably gives you the least likely in my mind, because one of these teams already has 3 losses, but give me the most to least likely of those teams to make a bowl game.
I think Northwestern might win 2 more games this year, so I'm going to have them least likely. They've got a rough schedule for a Big Ten West team, as rough as I guess you could have. But in terms of what were the other, Purdue and Nebraska, you said? Yeah. Nebraska, after what they did, they fired their defensive coordinator, and you were wondering, would there be the emotional lift? And there wasn't. You had the one drive, and then that was the end. And I don't know how you recover, other than the fact that, hey, you get to play the Big Ten West. So this is like antibiotics for their infection. Purdue, I feel like we now expect Jeff Brom to win 7 or 8 games, and then, can he get to 9, or is it going to stay at 6? There's this range there. If a couple of things go well, having Nebraska and Iowa and Northwestern at home, you figure those are wins. At Indiana, I won't be shocked to see Purdue win that. At Illinois, I wouldn't be shocked to see Purdue win that. So they could, I think they could still finish with 6-7 wins if things go well. So I would put them the most likely to finish at the top and then make a bowl game. And Illinois, we're not talking about Illinois, but I'm going with the old Boilermakers, then the Cornhuskers, and the Northwestern. That's, boy, I can't do that. I have to go Northwestern then Nebraska. I've already seen them play.
It feels like Purdue is very likely to make a bowl game, and the other two are very unlikely to make a bowl game because Nebraska already has 3 losses. They come off a bye week. They've got Indiana at Rutgers at Purdue, which is like, okay, maybe you go 2-1 there, so now you're 3-4, and then home for Illinois, home for Minnesota, at Michigan, home for Wisconsin, at Iowa. And at some point, you've lost enough games where everyone sort of checks out, especially under an interim coach. That feels real 4-8, 5-7 to me, and it's like 5-7 if lots of stuff breaks right, and it just doesn't. It doesn't feel like either of those teams are particularly close. Nationally now, give me a team or two that has exceeded your expectations so far, because it feels like any given week, someone is up and someone is down, and the tricky part of this is try not to let the last 48 hours of football overly influence your answer here, because it feels like everyone has probably had some wild mood swings from week to week on certain teams, depending on which version of that team shows up.
In terms of, it's hard to have expectations exceeded within 3 weeks, but Penn State winning at Auburn to me is, and after seeing most of the game, it has been lessened by watching how bad Auburn is. But you became the first Big Ten team to ever play there and ever win there. But I think Clemson, Oklahoma, USC, and that 5, 6, 7, those teams have done what they're supposed to, and then maybe a little bit more. USC, of course, with the offense. We'll see what happens with their defense. I guess Kentucky would be a good one as well. They've had trouble running the ball, and yet they're finding ways to win. And Mark Stoops is one of those guys that comes up in all of these conversations, and you wonder, would he be somebody that would look at Nebraska or look at elsewhere? And he's got a pretty good thing going there at Kentucky. Will they ever get to the point where Minnesota was with Glenn Mason and want more and not realize that they can't have more, that they have reached the pinnacle, and then he starts to get a hot seat or whatever? Because eventually Florida's not going to be down forever. Tennessee's not going to be down forever. It's going to be tougher and tougher for Kentucky to win moving forward. But I like what Kentucky has done, and now that they get into the meat of the conference schedule, we'll see if they can maintain it.
I think those are some good choices. I'm sure our audience knows, just loves to hear a bit more about SEC teams and how they might be better than people think. So I will add 2 more names to this list. I did have Penn State down there. Tennessee they're 3-0, and they killed Ball State. They killed whoever they played this weekend. Now I'm forgetting. They killed Akron, 63-6, and then they had a road win against Pitt in overtime. It's sandwiched in the middle there. That's this is not an incredible that's not a top 5 win or anything like that. That's a respectable win, and they've really handled their business in the other ones. They have Florida coming to town this weekend. That is the game day game this weekend. They feel like maybe they've turned a corner from the kind of Music City Bowl kind of Tennessee to maybe a Citrus Bowl kind of Tennessee. I don't think they're probably going to be college football playoff Tennessee. I don't think they're going to win the East this year, but it feels like they're probably back to being maybe a pretty decent Tennessee, which was more than I was expecting from them. The other team is also in the SEC East, and oh boy, Georgia. Georgia might be real good this year. I thought Georgia might take a little bit of a step back, and by step back, I mean from 1 to 3. And the Week 1 win over Oregon, 49-3. At the time, it was like, wow, Oregon must be really terrible. And then Oregon has turned out to not be terrible. They just beat BYU last weekend. We'll see how it holds up over the course of the season, but it does feel like Georgia might be the class of the SEC right now. We'll see. I am not counting out Nick Saban. I have learned my lesson many, many times before that you never do that. But it does feel like Georgia might be a little, at least a step ahead right now of Alabama and potentially Ohio State. They certainly have the best win of those 3 teams right now. So that's something that's worth mentioning. All right, and give me one team. We're going to wrap up with this one team that's been disappointing. One team that has really failed to meet your expectations so far this season.
I don't know if it's failed to meet my expectations, but I still think we have to mention Iowa. We didn't expect them to be good, but they've been so bad. It's okay to point out how bad offensively they are. I am almost duty bound. We were duty bound to mention how duty-bound Iowa's offense is, if you will.
It is duty. You're right.
And it's bad. And I saw a stat this week that Ohio State put up more total yards against Toledo than Iowa has put up all season by like almost 100 yards. And yeah, we're not looking at Iowa as maybe like a 10-2 team or a 40-point-a-game team, but you cannot accept what they're doing offensively and think that it's okay. Like, they should be pointed out and pointed out and pointed out until they do something about it, because, Tom, it's wrong.
It is wrong, and it feels slightly more offensive that it's not just some moron coaching the offense, but it's the coach's kid who is the moron who's coaching the offense, which just makes it somehow so much worse. Yeah, I'm with you there. I think that's a good one, because if they just had a 20 points a game, if they were just scoring 20, 24 points a game instead of literally 7 2 weeks in a row, then okay, they would be 3-0. They would probably be if they're scoring 24 points, they are a very boring 10-2 team in the Big Ten West. And it's like 24 points is the absolute bare minimum of competence that you would ask of an offense. And they're not even close to that. I think they got to 24, but it was against Nevada. And Nevada is a bad, bad, bad team. They just lost their coach, and they're kind of starting from scratch. And Iowa got all the way into the 20s. It was like, wow, shootout. So, yes, but that Iowa defense is so good that if they just had a competent offense, they would be probably a 10-win team. They do not have a competent offense. They will not be a 10-win team. The only other team I would throw in this category is Texas A&M, which is kind of similar. I think there's some offensive system problems there where Jimbo Fisher's offense has just kind of not worked for a while, and Jimbo Fisher just kind of keeps running it, and they don't really have a quarterback there. They have multiple quarterbacks. They don't have a good quarterback. And, Max Johnson played last weekend, and they won, but they didn't win by a whole heck of a lot. It was kind of close and gross against Miami. Of course, they lost to App State last week. And that just feels like that is going to be deeply unfortunate when they run into Alabama in a few weeks. That feels like that's probably not going to go well for them. And, that was a team that was being bandied about as potentially a college football playoff team. You don't get to lose to App State and be in the college football playoff. So that feels like that's already done. So, yes, I will count them as a disappointment as well. Never a disappointment, however, to talk to Tony Gerdeman. Always a pleasure, Tony. And if you want to hear Tony and I talk more about football, well, friends, are you in luck? We're dropping our Michigan Monday episode of the Buckeye Weekly podcast on Monday, but we're kind of not talking about Michigan because Michigan is playing a Minnesota-type schedule and not really worth conversation. But boy, there are some other teams in the Big Ten East that we are going to go a little bit deeper dive on. Some teams that have played some more interesting games, and so we're going to take a look at that and who really represents the biggest threat to the Buckeyes in the Big Ten East now that we're heading into conference play season, with Wisconsin on deck for the Buckeyes, and then heading to East Lansing the week after that. It is Rutgers, and then East Lansing. Sorry, didn't mean to overlook Rutgers. That's something that no one should ever do. But yes, that is heading into the meat of the Big Ten schedule now. Finally, so going to talk a little Big Ten football and Big Ten East football and where things stack up on the Buckeye Weekly podcast. That'll be dropping on Monday. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.